Welcome back to the Deep Dive podcast. It is January 21, 2026. If you spent your morning actually doing your job instead of figuring out how to funnel government grants into a fleet of luxury SUVs, then I have bad news. You're a sucker. But at least you're not in federal custody. Small wins, people. I'm your host, Maple, and today we are looking at the final unanimous oof heard around the Midwest. We're talking about Aimee Bock and the Feeding Our Future trial. You remember the pandemic, right? When we were all baking sourdough and crying into our Zoom screens? Well, while we were doing that, Aimee was allegedly, well, now convictedly, running the world's most expensive imaginary friend dinner party. Let's dive into the $250 million grift that makes your 2020 tax return look like a masterpiece of honesty. And this wasn't just some local scheme that got out of hand. Oh no, federal prosecutors have officially called it one of the largest pandemic aid scams in the entire country. That's not just a label, it's a headline that tells you this story is a really, really big deal. So, how did this all end? Well, to really understand the whole story, we have to start with the dramatic conclusion, the verdict that brought this whole thing crashing down. So the verdict is in, unanimous, guilty on all counts. The jury completely rejected the defense's argument that this was just a small nonprofit that got overwhelmed. They saw a deliberate plan. The prosecution showed that instead of chicken nuggets and apple slices, that $250 million was served to a much smaller group, mainly in the form of luxury Porsches, designer handbags, and a whole lot of real estate. Okay, so a guilty verdict, a massive fraud. But how? How in the world did they actually pull this off? Let's get into the mechanics of how you steal $250 million meant for hungry kids. You know, at its heart, the operation was pretty straightforward. Feeding Our Future acted like a legitimate umbrella organization. It used its government-approved status to sponsor dozens of smaller meal sites. The catch? So many of these sites were totally fake, just names on paper submitting invoices for millions of meals that were never, ever served. It really boils down to 4 main steps. First, they took advantage of the chaos during the pandemic when the government loosened the rules to get aid out faster. Second, they set up this huge network of sham sites. Third, they just forged all the paperwork, fake invoices, fake lists of kids. And the final step, they washed all that cash through a web of shell companies to make it look clean. And where did all that money for the kids go? Not to grocery stores, that's for sure. It went to luxury car dealerships, it went to real estate agents, it went to high-end jewelers. The gap between what the money was for and what it was actually spent on is just staggering. And sitting right at the center of this entire operation was one person, Aimee Bock. So let's take a closer look at the woman who prosecutors say was the mastermind behind this whole thing. It's kind of wild because before this all came out, Aimee Bock had this public persona as a champion for the community, an advocate for small businesses. But the person the jury saw was completely different, a ringleader who approved sham sites and became what local leaders are now calling the shame of Minnesota. You know, a quote from one of the reports on this case just perfectly sums up the mindset. It said, the leaders treated the money as a revenue stream to be maximized, not a trust to be safeguarded. And really, that says it all, doesn't it? It was never about feeding kids. It was a business model. Hold that thought. Time for a quick, non-fraudulent announcement. Look, I'm not asking for $250 million. I'm just asking for a couple of clicks. Unlike certain nonprofits we could mention, the Deep Dive podcast actually provides the content we claim to. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the audacity of human greed, do me a solid. Smash that subscribe button, leave a 5-star review. It really helps us out. Now, back to the reckoning. For 6 weeks, a jury had to sort through this incredibly complex case. The prosecution just laid it all out, showing how this was a deliberate plan to take advantage of those emergency COVID rules. And after all that, the jury came back with a unanimous decision, guilty on every single charge.
But here's the part that really stings. A conviction is one thing, but getting the money back is another. Of that $250 million that was stolen, an estimated $175 million is still just gone, vanished. If you look at this chart, you can see what I mean. Authorities have worked hard to seize about $75 million in assets, the houses, the cars, the cash. But that big chunk, the vast majority of the money, is still missing. $175 million that was supposed to go to kids. And the fallout just keeps coming. Aimee Bock herself has been ordered to forfeit over $5 million. The government is seizing everything it can find, and there are dozens of other people involved who are facing some serious prison time. This story is definitely not over yet.
So, why are we talking about this? Why did one fraud case in Minnesota become this massive national story? Well, it's because it tapped into a huge fear a lot of us had during the pandemic. Where was all that aid money actually going?
This whole mess perfectly highlights that classic problem you have in any crisis. You have the desperate need to get help out fast, but you also have the critical need to make sure that help isn't being stolen. Feeding our future is what happens when that balance goes horribly wrong. And the feds are making it very clear this isn't just about one bad nonprofit. They're using this case as a warning shot, part of a much bigger nationwide crackdown to show that they are coming for anyone who abused those pandemic relief programs.
So, there you have it. The moral of the story: if the government gives you a mountain of cash to feed kids, maybe actually buy some groceries. Or at least don't brag about being the mob on a device the FBI can subpoena. This episode was produced by the legendary FireflyHaku. I've checked Haku's books, and I can confirm that every single cent of our budget goes toward high-quality audio and a very reasonable amount of caffeine. No Porsches were purchased in the making of this episode, mostly because Haku is a perfectionist. They handle the compliance, I handle the sarcastic commentary. It's a match made in a very legal heaven. Thanks for hanging out in my ear space today. Go out there, do something honest, and try not to become a federal cautionary tale before we talk again next week. Stay skeptical.